Nora Evans had always felt like life in the small town of Lancaster was a waiting room, holding her back from the bigger things she was meant to do. At 35, she had returned to the town after a few years of working as a journalist in the bustling city of Hallcrest. The job there had been intense but unfulfilling, mostly puff pieces and corporate write-ups. She had burned out and returned home to catch her breath, hoping to find inspiration in the quieter rhythm of Lancaster. Most of her work as a journalist for the Lancaster Gazette was focused on local events, town hall meetings, small business openings, and the occasional local scandal, which hardly ever amounted to much. She had friends in town, and her routine was comfortable, but the gnawing feeling that she was meant for something more kept her restless. Then she met Owen Cray, and everything changed. It was a rainy autumn night, the kind of evening where the streets glistened under the lamplight and the smell of wet leaves hung in the air. Nora had gone to Sullivan's, the local bar, after a particularly tedious day at work. She wasn't expecting anything exciting, just a quiet drink and maybe some small talk with the bartender. Owen had been sitting at the end of the bar, nursing a drink. He wasn't from Lancaster, that much was obvious. His sharp suit, the way he held himself with a quiet confidence, he seemed out of place in the small, working-class town. He introduced himself casually, his voice smooth and calm, his eyes flicking over her with just enough interest to catch her attention. They got to talking and Nora felt an immediate connection. Owen told her he was in town temporarily, working on an urban development project just outside of Lancaster. He rented a house on the outskirts of town, near the woods. There was something about him that drew Nora in. He seemed mysterious, world-weary, but grounded. He listened when she spoke, asking about her work and her ambitions in a way that made her feel understood. For the first time in a long time, Nora felt like someone saw her not as a small-town journalist, but as someone who could be more. Their relationship developed quickly. Within weeks, they were spending nearly all their time together. Owen was charming, kind, and attentive. He made her feel like her life could be bigger, like the things she dreamed of achieving were within reach. And more than that, he made her feel alive, like she had found something worth holding on to. But as time passed, little things began to bother her. Owen would disappear for hours at a time without explanation, sometimes leaving in the middle of the night to take phone calls from unknown numbers. When she asked about them, he would brush her off, saying it was just work. His behavior seemed increasingly erratic, but whenever she tried to press him for more information, he'd smile, kiss her on the forehead, and say, "You worry too much, Nora." At first, she told herself that it didn't matter. Everyone had secrets, and she didn't need to know every detail of his life. But as the weeks went on, her unease grew. The phone calls became more frequent, and Owen's absences started to last longer. Sometimes he would come home late, his shirt wrinkled, his face tense. But when she asked him where he had been, his answers were vague and evasive. Then one evening, after Owen had left on yet another unexplained errand, Nora made a decision. She couldn't live in the dark any longer. She needed to know what was going on. The next day, while Owen was at work, Nora drove out to his rented house. It was a small, isolated place, tucked away in the woods on the edge of town. She felt a knot of guilt in her chest as she let herself in with the spare key Owen had given her, but her curiosity overpowered her sense of right and wrong. Inside, the house was sparse, almost sterile, as if Owen had never planned to stay long. The furniture was minimal, and there were few personal items around. It didn't feel like a home. In the back room, she found a locked desk drawer. Her hands trembled as she searched through the drawers in the kitchen, finally finding a small key hidden under a pile of loose change. When she opened the drawer, her heart sank. Inside were stacks of documents, files, and photographs. At first glance, they didn't make sense. There were maps, blueprints of buildings she didn't recognize, and notes scribbled in a language she couldn't read. But then she saw the photos of people. Some of them were local business owners, others were people from out of town, and a few were of her colleagues at the Lancaster Gazette. They weren't casual shots, they were surveillance photos taken from a distance documenting their movements, their meetings, their lives. And then there were the other photos, darker ones. Photos of people tied to chairs, their faces bruised and terrified, their eyes wide with fear. And in the corner of one photo, standing over a bound and gagged man, was Owen. His expression was cold, emotionless. This wasn't the man she knew. This was someone else. Nora's stomach twisted with fear. What the hell had she stumbled onto? Her mind raced as she quickly shut the drawer and left the house, trying to process what she had seen. Owen wasn't who he said he was. He was involved in something dark, something dangerous. She didn't know what to do. She couldn't go to the police, not yet, not without more proof. But she couldn't confront him either. Not until she was sure she was safe. For the next few days, Nora acted as if nothing had changed. She went to work, spent time with Owen, and tried to pretend she hadn't seen those photos. But her mind was in a constant state of panic. Every time Owen looked at her, she wondered if he knew what she had discovered. She began sleeping with the door locked, just in case. But she couldn't keep it up forever. One evening, after another tense dinner, she finally snapped. "Owen," she said, her voice trembling, "we need to talk." He looked up from his plate, his expression unreadable. "What's wrong?" "I know about the files," she said, her heart pounding. "I saw the photos. I know what you've been doing." For a moment, Owen didn't move. He set his fork down, his face calm, but his eyes darkened. "You shouldn't have done that, Nora." She swallowed hard, her fear rising. "I had to." "What are you involved in, Owen? Who are those people?" He stood up, walking to the window, his back to her. "It's not what you think," he said quietly. "Those people, they were dangerous." "What does that mean? What gives you the right to hurt them?" He turned to face her, his expression cold, his voice low. "You don't understand. This is bigger than you, bigger than both of us. I'm doing what needs to be done." "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "You're a monster." Owen's face hardened. He took a step toward her, his eyes locking onto hers. "I can't let you leave, Nora." Her breath caught in her throat. "What are you saying?" "You know too much," he said, his voice calm, terrifyingly calm. "I'm sorry, but you shouldn't have looked." Nora's instincts kicked in. She bolted from the chair, rushing toward the front door, but Owen was faster. He grabbed her arm, yanking her back with a force that knocked the breath out of her. She screamed, struggling against him, but his grip was like iron. The struggle lasted only moments, but it felt like hours. In the end, it wasn't the fight that ended it, it was Owen's hands around her throat. Nora's vision blurred, her breath fading, and the last thing she saw was the cold, emotionless look on his face as he took her life. When Nora's co-workers noticed she hadn't shown up to work in days, they called the police. Lancaster was a small town, and people didn't just disappear without a trace. Detective Daniels was assigned to the case, initially expecting it to be nothing more than a misunderstanding. People left town all the time. But as he began looking into Nora's life, he realized there was more to the story. Nora's friends told Daniels about Owen, the mysterious man she had been seeing. None of them knew much about him, except that he was new to town and that Nora had been acting strange in the days leading up to her disappearance. Daniels visited Owen's house, but it was empty. There was no sign of Nora, and no sign of Owen. But when they searched the house more thoroughly, they found what Nora had seen, the files, the photos, the evidence of Owen's criminal activities. And in the basement they found Nora's body, hastily hidden beneath a pile of old furniture. The town was shaken to its core. Nora, their friend, their colleague, had been murdered, and the man responsible was gone. Detective Daniels worked tirelessly to track down Owen. The evidence left behind in his home told a story of a man involved in a larger criminal organization, something that stretched far beyond Lancaster. Owen had been part of a network that dealt in extortion, blackmail, and worse. He had been collecting information on powerful people, using it to control them. And when Nora had discovered the truth, she had paid the price with her life. A nationwide manhunt was launched, but Owen Cray had vanished. Weeks turned into months, and while the network he was part of began to unravel, Owen himself remained a ghost. The case haunted Detective Daniels, but more than that, it haunted the people of Lancaster. Nora's death became a scar on the town, a reminder that even in the quietest corners of the world, danger could still lurk. Eventually, a lead came through. Owen had been spotted in another town, using a different name, blending into the background as he always did. Daniels and his team closed in, finally bringing him into custody. Owen was tried and convicted, but for Nora's friends and family, the damage had already been done. Nora had wanted to write the big story that would change her life. Instead, she became the story, a cautionary tale of love, trust, and betrayal. The people of Lancaster mourned her, but they also feared the darkness that had come into their town, knowing that the man they had let into their lives had been capable of such horrific things. Even with Owen behind bars, the shadow he cast over Nora's life and her death would never fully lift.